Welcome to the Take the North podcast. I'm David Haugh from the Mully and Haugh Show on 670 The Score. Dan Wiederer is from the Chicago Tribune. And we are here after the Chiefs beat the 49ers to win Super Bowl 58, 25-22. Overtime. Game came down to the last play in the extra session. A perfect way to end the NFL season. No games until July. Maybe the Bears will be the next game scheduled on the NFL calendar as part of the Hall of Fame game, as Dan predicted. Dan, Super Bowl, I think, started slow, finished strong. Chiefs dynasty, Patrick Mahomes. Can't say much more than that.
Yeah, I was the only one on this podcast to pick the 49ers, and one of the few people nationally, I feel like, that was picking San Francisco. And I told you how risky it was to pick against Patrick Mahomes, and I was feeling really good about myself. And then what happens? Patrick Mahomes is inevitable, and he gets the last possession of the season. And when you put the ball in the hands of the best player in the sport on the last possession of the season, we know what usually happens. I remember during the pre-draft process of 2017, ironically, doing a story on Deshaun Watson as the Bears were doing their quarterback homework, and someone that had worked very closely, I think it might have been Jordan Palmer, that was working closely with Deshaun Watson during the pre-draft process, brought up that year's Super Bowl, which was Tom Brady with the ball in his hands in the last possession of the season, leading a scoring drive to win it all. And that's what happens when you have an all-time great, right? And that's what that Super Bowl was. It was, as you mentioned, for most of three quarters, low on entertainment. And then we had a really compelling fourth quarter and overtime that ended with Patrick Mahomes doing Patrick Mahomes things and collecting his third Lombardi trophy.
Yeah, I just think it hurts probably more in Chicago, but there are 9 other teams that passed on Mahomes before he went 10th, or 8 other teams. And I think that
make it 10, because the Buffalo Bills are the team that traded that pick to the Chiefs and are now annually getting their butts kicked out the side door of the playoffs by the Chiefs.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to complain if Josh Allen is your quarterback, but I think that's a point well taken. You look at the other teams around the league and they have some sense of regret watching Mahomes do what he's done. And it just, the symmetry all happened in Kansas City. It might not have been that way in Chicago or elsewhere, or in Houston, or whatever the case may be. But you pair Reed with Mahomes and Mahomes with Reed, and then, they traded Tyreek Hill and have won back-to-back Super Bowl titles. So when we talk about, this is a Take the North podcast. It's about the Bears through the Bears prism. And I think if you're trying to strain through that Bears prism and see, as I referred to it on the Mully and Haugh Show on Monday morning, kind of microscopic evidence that there is some sort of, something to be taken away from this. It's that when you have an elite quarterback, it outweighs everything else. And you can win the championship with a very strong defense and an elite quarterback that outweighs everything else. So the 49ers, more talented roster, better depth, better weapons, and ultimately didn't matter because Patrick Mahomes did what great players do. He carried the Chiefs and willed them to a victory.
So 2 things I would say to that. I was asked on the Bernstein and Holmes show on Monday afternoon what was most impressive to me about who the Chiefs are. And I just said that it's the belief that Patrick Mahomes imparts in the entire organization. You can feel it when you're watching the game. You're down 3 points in overtime and you're taking over the ball, and the entire world knows you're going to go win the football game. You know what I mean? Like that there's that supreme confidence that you can tell that Patrick Mahomes' 10 teammates on the field feel, his coaching staff on the sidelines feel, the owners up in the owner's box feel. And that belief is so valuable to the critical stages of critical games that lead you to the promised land. Like the Chiefs have now experienced 3 times. Once while Ryan Poles was part of their front office, and twice since he's left. And so he's got to understand that. And I think he does, because he's experienced that, as we've talked about before. I also reflect back a month when we were sitting at Halas Hall listening to the Bears end of season press conference, and Kevin Warren bringing up that Rams team that he was a part of many years ago, and talking at length again about how many things had to go right for that team to just be in a position to win the Super Bowl by 1 yard on the final play of the Super Bowl. And I think this game on Sunday, David, was a reminder of just how many things need to go right to even dream about holding that trophy up. And you think about the teams that the Chiefs dispatched here over the last month that had terrific seasons: the Miami Dolphins, the Buffalo Bills, the Baltimore Ravens, the San Francisco 49ers. All those teams entered the postseason with reasonable belief that they could be the last team standing, and they all fell through a trap door when they ran into the Chiefs. And if you need any more reminder of how painful it must be to get to the doorstep of that, there's Kyle Shanahan for you. Right now, he becomes the first coach in history to lose 2 Super Bowls in overtime, and those 2 Super Bowls were lost in overtime to Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes. Right? Is it the heartbreak that Kyle Shanahan feels? Obviously he was a coordinator with the Falcons, and then he lost the 2 Super Bowls to Mahomes in the Chiefs 49ers games. But think of the anguish that guy must feel, never having reached the mountaintop and understanding how many things he did well and how good his teams were. And then you run into an all-time great and it doesn't matter.
Well, he's been the head coach twice now of teams that lost to Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs after being in front by 10 or more.
Yeah.
That's one heck of a legacy. I know he's 44. And I know that he's got a lot of football left to coach, and his dad said the right things about, getting back to work. And this is the way it is, and coaching, and all those things are true. But boy, Kyle Shanahan, there he is again, answering questions that no coach wants to answer, and also becoming well known as the best coach who never won a Super Bowl. And that's not that was Andy Reid for a long time.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the guy who stood across the sideline from him, who 4 years ago just won his first one. And you think about Mike Shanahan's first Super Bowl win with John Elway as his quarterback. Think of the agony that those Broncos teams with Elway's had to go through. And John Elway was forever known as the guy who couldn't get it done on the final Sunday of the season. And then he did it twice. And so you have to cling to those beacons of hope. But as we talked about on this podcast many, many times, there's no promises ever that you're going to be back in that position anytime soon. And the hard work that it takes to get there is monumental, and it's massive. And it's just, I think it's a lesson for the people up at 1920 Football Drive that the idea of settling in any way, shape, or form, in any position, in any way that you go about this sport it's not acceptable, because in order to be the last team on the stage with Roger Goodell and a silver shiny trophy, you've got to do everything right all the time.
Crazy question, but do you think that, given the choice, heart of hearts, honest answer from Ryan Poles, would you take over the Chicago Bears and run your own organization as a general manager for 2 years, or would you stay in your old job with the Kansas City Chiefs and be a front office component for an organization that has back-to-back Super Bowl championships? I would love to know what his honest answer would be, because you can't help but almost feel a little empathy. He did leave, and he's got a great job. I'm not diminishing anything that he's done and accomplished, but I think at one point in time he had to have looked on last night, as he might have looked on last year, and said, what exactly did I do here?
Well, look, I love the question, and I love the scenario, because it takes me back to the first longer story I did with Ryan when he became the general manager. And I led that story with Ryan on top of a double-decker bus in downtown Kansas City, being part of that first Super Bowl parade. And for him, it was that vision of trying to do it in a new place with his own challenge to be the architect of one of those things. And it's a great question you ask here, David, because now you're, at the front end of a landmark offseason, and you've made your decisions on the coaching staff and you've got that squared away. And now comes the biggest question of all. What are you going to do at the quarterback position? And can you find one of these guys that can be the catalyst that takes you to that level? And I think the passion and the allure of trying to find that is just so absolutely energizing and invigorating that I think Ryan is eager for this. Now, if 6 or 7 years go by and the Bears haven't gotten anywhere near that stage, and they haven't been in the playoffs, and they haven't been anywhere near the Super Bowl, then maybe we ask that question again and say, yeah, there's probably some regret. But I think in this moment, I think all it does is energize and motivate him to experience that here in a city that he knows. I mean, think about it, David. You know as well as anyone, if that gets done here, forget it. There's a statue of you.
You don't have to win 3 and 5 years and call yourself a dynasty. You win one for 30 years and you're a legend.
Yeah.
So you look at what we're talking about now. We still, had Gary Fensick as a guest on the morning show. And so guys who win in Chicago are forever revered. By the same token, I wondered this, and this is to a lesser degree because, Matt Nagy did not have the choice to leave Chicago. He was fired. He landed in
Yeah.
Kansas City. He fell upward, and now I wonder how he would answer that question, Matt. You could, for the last couple of years, and kept your job and had middling success with the Bears as a head coach, or you could go to Kansas City and be the offensive coordinator and help call plays for the best quarterback alive and active right now. What would you do if we were going to tell you won back-to-back Super Bowls? Um,
Might be a different answer.
Probably different answer.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think Matt probably has a great ability to sleep at night now, and I'm sure he has things that he will forever kick himself over from his time coaching the Bears up in Lake Forest. But to go back and immediately win 2 Super Bowls and be part of that, and to connect with Andy and Patrick and Kelsey in that group, and have the chance to be some part of something legendary, it's gonna give him an opportunity, in my opinion, to eventually get himself back in the mix when he feels it's the right time to try again. And whether he gets another chance, we'll see. You keep stacking up these accomplishments and these achievements, somebody's going to talk to you. He's represented by Trace Armstrong, who's been very influential at getting his clients job opportunities and being able to keep them in those opportunities. So, we'll see. But that's certainly another subplot to all.
It is interesting because we talk all throughout the offseason. We just went through a coaching cycle, and every candidate, it seemed, had some sort of link to either Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah.
And when you look at their coaching trees, if you will, they have a lot of branches, and they extend to a lot of different cities and organizations. Andy Reid's does too, and he's been around longer. But you don't see Nagy as a candidate. You don't see Eric Bieniemy being asked to interview any longer. You don't see Spagnuolo because of maybe his age, but you don't see the Andy Reid effect as prevalent in these coaching searches and cycles as you do the younger guys who, basically he's beating now.
Yeah.
And so he's won 3 Super Bowls in 5 years and beating teams and getting to the point where, his coaches aren't getting the same kinds of looks.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting. Once upon a time, the Reid tree was one that people were in love with, and then there's varying degrees of success, and then the new trend takes over. And right now, that's where it's going. I had a couple game-related questions that I wanted to pick your brain on. The first one being the play that the 49ers ran before settling for their overtime field goal. I've watched it like 9 times. And I feel like it's one of those ones that if you're a 49ers fan or a 49ers coach, you're going to kick yourself for months watching, because Chris Jones basically comes unblocked. And when you rewatch it, I don't know if this was the design of the play, but it looked like it was set up to be maybe a quick swing to George Kittle with plenty of room forward to go and put in the touchdown that could have changed the Super Bowl. And somehow Chris Jones is unaccounted for. The one guy that you have to account for up front on that Chiefs defensive line. I don't know if you took note of anything on that last possession, but clearly when you take the ball first and you know that you've got to maximize every little thing here so that you can put the pressure on the Chiefs, that moment when you're on the doorstep of potentially doing that is potentially haunting.
Yeah, it is. I was surprised that they took the ball to begin with at all. I mean, that's where I would start.
Yeah.
I think we've gone back and forth on that. People will continue to. I think that's going to be one of those decisions that does not age well for Kyle Shanahan. The metrics may show one thing. It's a very small sample size when you look at the new overtime rules and what to do and why you do it. But Dan, I think that decision, because the Chris Jones observation is a good one. I think it all started for me when you looked at Kyle Shanahan when they won the coin toss. They took the ball.
Yeah, and look, and I said there were 2 defenses that you could pitch to me that I would at least listen to. The first one is, okay, we needed to get our defense some rest after being on the field at the end of regulation. I don't subscribe to that one. You can bring it to me, but I don't subscribe to it. The other one is that if you match the Chiefs on the first 2 possessions of overtime, now it's a sudden death format, and you're going to be the team to have the ball first in sudden death. So if you exchange field goals or exchange touchdowns or exchange punts, now you're getting the ball, and the next time someone scores, that's in your hands. But that's too far down the road.
Right.
And you can't do that in these season on the line moments is be thinking 3 possessions down the road. You got to be thinking of the very next possession and figuring out what the best possible scenario for your team is. Because obviously, if you knew the Chiefs were going to score a touchdown on their drive, when you're down there inside the red zone and it's 4th and whatever it was, 4th and 4, 4th and 5, you're going for it. You're clearly going for it. And maybe it's a different ball game. So that I do think you're right that they're going to kick themselves over over that. I also thought, for me personally, the sequence where I felt like the game got away from the 49ers and the control was early in the second half, where you got the interception of Mahomes on the first possession after halftime in plus territory. And it's 10-3, and you've got a chance to pad that lead, and you go 3 and out. Okay, I'll live with the 3 and out, because you still punt the ball down and you down it at the 1, and you force the Chiefs to punt right back to you. Okay, now you can play that complimentary football and try and score and keep the game in your control. And they went 3 and out again. And on those 6 plays, Christian McCaffrey never took a handoff. And that was one of those ones where it's like, if you're looking back and you're thinking, man, like, you just needed to squeeze something out of those possessions, and you got nothing, and you never let the best, non-quarterback offensive player in the league touch the football. Now you got to really spend some nights thinking about that.
I brought that up on Monday morning with Larry Krueger from 95.7, the game in San Francisco, because that really bothered me too. And his post-game explanation from Shanahan was rooted in the fact that basically, yeah, McCaffrey had 30 touches. He did. So I guess that is, a commitment to getting him the football. I just feel like the game at that point where you just cited, it was there where you could have built on the lead and maybe put some distance between, you and Mahomes. So the miraculous comeback couldn't happen. So you didn't, there's a difference between 10 and 14 points and what kind of cushion you're building. So I thought that was a huge moment. And I think they neglected the best offensive player in football. And I don't understand it. Even the smartest coaches and play callers have moments of like that represent lapses in judgment, and they're really hard to understand. It's going to leave a mark, because Kyle Shanahan, did not have a good second half.
No, and look, and they're still right there with a chance to win the Super Bowl, and you right there's just not enough, and right there leaves scars, and right there and really close is the type of things that nightmares are made of. And so, good luck, in San Francisco, dealing with those again and trying to make your way through this. And then obviously, as you talk about seeing this through the Bears prism, it's like, okay, like you want to play football with the big boys, you better have some people on your side that are big boys, big time, clutch playmakers that can carry you to those levels. And so now it's the opportunity to go possibly unite with one.
Anything else on the game before we get on to the first day of the NFL offseason?
No, I mean, fun game. The last play being called Tom and Jerry is so quintessentially Andy Reid, cute name, similar design to Corn Dog last year, and they get McCole Hardman out there in the flat, and the 49ers had no chance. And the football game ends. I guess Mahomes' last 2 scores, the field goal at the end of regulation came with 3 seconds left. The touchdown in overtime came with 3 seconds left in the first overtime period, and I think it was a 3-yard touchdown pass there. So 3-3-3 is cashing your jackpot in Las Vegas.
McCole Hardman spends most of his season in New York with the Jets, comes back to Kansas City, and ends the season. I don't want to say Super Bowl hero, but he did catch the winning touchdown in the Super Bowl. So that's a pretty good finish to a season that was pretty lousy for the most part. I think it was also a testament of the way that Mahomes leads as much as he plays well.
Yeah.
All season long, he was the last guy. You talk about quarterbacks and, temperamental and being publicly scrutinized. He never really broke bad on his receivers. And Scantling, whether it was Hardman or whoever was dropping passes, and he had a lot of drops, he was always believing them, always having public confidence committed to them. And it paid off, because Valdez-Scantling caught 1 touchdown, Hardman caught the winning one, and Patrick Mahomes' faith was rewarded.
Yeah, and the grind, it's not just the Super Bowl, it's the grind where the Chiefs were left for dead, in late November, early December, not dead, but nobody thought that they would be the last team standing at that stage. And they just kept going, and here they are again. And now all of a sudden you think you're lucky stars if you're the Bears that they are in the other conference. You know what I mean? I think you just, those teams that are playing really good football, the Bills being one of them, the Ravens being one of them, you've got your hands full, for years to come, knowing that team is always going to be in the way.
So the combine is a mere 2 weeks away in Indianapolis. There will be a lot of attention focused on the scrutiny paid Caleb Williams and every other prospect in Indianapolis. The Bears' due diligence, I think, is underway. Dan, what are you hearing? And I think that I think obviously over the weekend, there were 2 reports I wanted to get your take on. Number one came from Ian Rappaport. It was basically a summary of the Bears offseason to this point, talking about having the number one overall pick. I think it's something that national reporters do on Super Bowl Sunday. He put it on NFL Network and NFL.com. Said the Bears would have to have a historic haul in order to trade the number one pick. That basically said to me, they're open for business, but they're going to have to make Ryan Poles an offer he can't refuse. And then the more interesting and I think kind of silly one, maybe not silly, but hard. It's more implausible. Adam Schefter reported that the Bears have had conversations about keeping the pick, taking Caleb Williams, and keeping Justin Fields, putting them both in the same locker room, meeting room, and depth chart. I don't think that one has a lot of weight. I'm not sure that it makes any sense to me, but those are the two national reports on Super Bowl Sunday for Bears fans to consider.
Let me start with the first one first, because if you remember, Ian Rappaport was the one who had the report in December about how the Bears would have to be blown away to move off of Justin Fields. And now here we are in the middle of February, and now they need to receive a historic haul to move off the number one pick. And so that is consistent with sort of the drumbeat that has continued to amplify around the league, that most people assume that the Bears aren't going to find reasons to talk themselves out of Caleb Williams unless they are offered something that blows their mind, and that is a quote unquote historic haul that is too good to pass on. And so you have this continuing momentum towards the Bears using the number one overall pick on Caleb Williams. It brings us to the Schefter nugget from pregame Sunday, which, I didn't entirely roll my eyes on, because I do know that it's a discussion that has happened inside the building, but I think it's a discussion through the lens of, look, like, we have to discuss everything. A healthy organization talks about every single possibility that's there for them, and then works through it collectively to come up with a reasonable answer to that. In this case, David, I think that nugget is nothing more than a case of information brokering, and it's letting the league know that, oh yeah, we may just keep Justin Fields here if we want to as well, and so you better have interest in Justin Fields to a level that you're willing to offer us maybe a little more than you thought you would, because he's not just out on the curb at the garage sale. We may still keep him if the offer is not good enough. And that's kind of what I made of that nugget, because we did a little thing on chicagotribune.com for Tuesday morning talking about this very premise. And I said, look, like, if you're realistically entertaining the possibility of pairing a rookie quarterback, presumably chosen at number one or somewhere else in the top five, you're opening up the door to an entire circus if you keep Justin Fields around. You've got to manage practice opportunity. You've got to manage locker room allegiance. You've got to manage the pressure on those two guys. You got to manage the big top that is going to come to your facility if you're having a quarterback competition between a highly touted quarterback and the guy that's on the way. There's just no reasonable way to make that work.
It's page 1 of the handbook of how to ruin a quarterback prospect. And the Bears are, that handbook is well tattered by now in Chicago at Hallis Hall. They screwed it up with Mitch Trubisky. He was responsible, but he didn't get much help. They certainly contributed to the stagnation of Justin Fields and his inability to develop into the kind of quarterback he possibly could be elsewhere. If you draft Caleb Williams and keep Justin Fields, you are doing harm to both of their careers.
Right.
And you're putting Caleb Williams in a terrible situation, walking into a locker room where he is the second most popular quarterback, and you're going to say, okay, this is the most conducive environment to winning. It's nonsensical to me that they would even consider it. I understand that when you get around a room and you talk about, okay, family, Dad's got a new job potentially. We can live in all sorts of different places: San Francisco, New York, Sioux City. Nothing against these cities. I could name a city that's not going to measure up, but you know what I mean. You don't pick. You have to discuss all options, but the least plausible one is the one that's easiest to dismiss. So I was really surprised Schefter even wrote about this, because it seems like that would be such a bad idea, such a terrible direction, and so easy to criticize.
I'm with you. I'm entirely with you. And the first time I heard the premise back in early January, I was just like, it's not workable. You can't possibly make that work. And I would assume someone in that room is capable of speaking up and saying that in a way that's convincing and assertive, and that they just move on to the other more likely options. Again, I do think that this is part of the job of insiders in the NFL is to put the word out there for the people that give them information a lot. And this felt like a situation where the word is being put out there that, the asking price for Justin Fields may be a little higher than you originally thought. And so go back to your people and figure out what you can get. It's that whole, showroom car dealership talk of like, oh, I think I can get you that, but let me go talk to my boss first.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So there's two little viral things that happened last week. I know how you like to entertain and evaluate things that hit the social media as much as they become popular. So the first one came from Jackson Smith-Njigba from the Seahawks, and he was being interviewed by Mark Carman from CHGO, and he was asked about new offensive coordinator Shane Waldron, who coached him in Seattle. And Smith-Njigba paused and he said something to the effect of, "Are we live?" And it certainly did not speak well to his, thoughts, and maybe didn't speak well of what he thought of Waldron. I don't know if that's reading too much into it. I wasn't there. I did communicate with Mark Carman about the context, but it didn't seem like he had much to offer. What did you read into that besides getting a good chuckle?
Yeah, I certainly got a good chuckle. And the thing I read into it is that if they're putting out a brochure on Shane Waldron to sell to the people of Chicago, it won't include a pull quote from Jackson Smith and Jigma. When Kevin Warren became the president at Ellis Hall, we had, 2 pages worth of endorsements from people that are in his orbit. I don't think Jackson Smith and Jigma is going to vocally endorse Shane Waldron. Rookie year didn't probably go as he had planned in terms of the productivity. And so didn't seem like he was a huge fan of what that offense was in Seattle. I understand that, no offense coordinator is ever going to be able to make all of his playmakers happy. That's a truth as old as time. I also do think that to just like brush it aside and go, oh, no big deal, nothing to see here, would be naive as well. Because I think as we documented after Shane Waldron was hired, he oversaw an offense in 2023 that was less productive in many of the most important statistical categories in the NFL than the Bears had. And so they rebooted with someone that was running an offense that wasn't as good. And so Jackson Smith-Njigba was part of that. And he was clearly a little bit frustrated, and he spoke about it at the Super Bowl. And I think it was one of those reminders that every word, particularly spoken in Super Bowl week, is subject to instant aggregation, and it's going to get under the microscope really quick.
I'm just imagining that one sheet, like they hand out Shane Waldron with all his credentials and past jobs, and the quote from Pete Carroll and the quote from Sean McVay,
and
then all of a sudden Smith-Njigba is quoted, "Is this live?"
Is this live?
Yeah, that would be great. That would be funny. Okay, the second one is a guy that you know and love, or well, at least. I don't know about you love, but Brandon Marshall, we both covered him with the Bears. And he had the audacity, it shouldn't be surprising, but this is what I think people say to get noticed, to get on the get aggregated, to become viral, because we could have just said about Jay Cutler, he was talking about his buddy.
I saw it.
And he said, Jay Cutler, former buddy, didn't live up to expectations as much as any quarterback, et cetera, could have been great. And I think a lot of people would have been fine with him stopping there, and people nodding in agreement. Anybody that looked at Jay Cutler's talent level could see what he was getting to. And then he had the audacity to say Jay Cutler was the worst quarterback he ever played with. Jimmy Clausen started the game in 2014. Brandon Marshall was on that team. That's just ridiculous. And to give it any oxygen, I feel kind of embarrassed about it. But that's exactly what he wanted, and that's exactly what he's getting, because it's so stupid. It's such a dumb thing to say.
I did not take the time in my personal life to make the entire list of quarterbacks that Brandon Marshall has played with, but I guarantee you that I could find more than one worse than Jay Cutler that would be on that list when we look at it. Brandon Marshall, by the way, who never went to the playoffs, correct? He never broke that streak of never playing in the postseason, did he?
True. No, nope, that's true.
One of the Brandon Marshall stories I tell among the dozen that those of us who had time to be around him can share is about 2014. And if you remember, there was a day on a golf cart in the courtyard at Olivet Nazarene University before lunch when hopes were riding high that Brandon Marshall put out a heartfelt campaign for Jay Cutler to be the most valuable player in the league.
MVP.
And was just absolutely tooting that bugle as best he could and talking about it. And then you fast forward 4 months and Brandon Marshall in a hospital with a punctured lung gets released. And rather than just let Charles Tillman handle his radio show appearance, drives out. I think it was like somewhere out near Elgin. After Charles Tillman had already sat in for him for 45 minutes so that he could get in the last word on that conversation to say that Aaron Kromer's comments that the Bears should have buyer's remorse over extending Jay Cutler was entirely true. You could make a documentary about the relationship between Jay Cutler and Brandon Marshall, and you could make it 14 parts, and I would watch every second of it because it would be the most fascinating piece of television and entertainment that you could possibly get, because you talk about two guys that, like, for periods really loved each other, two guys who have incredibly different and unique personalities, and Brandon can't let it go. I'd be curious if Jay had any retort on Instagram or on Inside the NFL or anywhere else that he has a chance to voice his opinion.
Haven't seen it. He's pretty good on Inside the NFL. I shouldn't be surprised. He's a Vandy grad, but he is definitely better than I thought he might be. He's a good analyst. I don't know that he will respond. If he does, it will be tongue in cheek.
B, that's me.
Right. Yeah, I kind of miss those guys a little bit. There's some days where those are fun memories. Speaking of things that not necessarily viral, but social media, what did you think of the Bears' Twitter treatment of them being on the clock?
Second year in a row that in the hour after the Super Bowl ended, the Bears made it clear to the rest of the league that they were next in line to make the most important decision to start the next wave of things. And so interesting. I mean, a little different. A year ago, there was, the question on, now the offseason begins and here we go and we're in charge of it. And this year it was kind of a bunch of TVs just blaring out, what would you do? What would you do? Here's what and it was just a reminder that, we've got a good 2.5 months left of speculation and question asking and rumor and reporting and everything else that's going to swirl around over what is a fascinating decision that they have to make. We talk about the Caleb Williams situation. That's obviously in the forefront of things. But you look at some of the opportunities that the Bears have outside of that number one pick to do a lot of cool things for their football team to put them in position to be in the playoffs next year. And there's reason, much more so than a year ago when it was a 14-loss team that had just lost 10 in a row and was clearly lost in the middle of the woods. There's much more reason this time around to get kind of pulled in to the start of the offseason hype and understand that it can be leading towards something. And so a little different reaction for me this year than I had last year.
Yeah, they're in a position to where if they wanted to supplement and build the roster up, they could put together a team capable of competing for a playoff spot in 2024. And then they also in a position where they could probably not be in the best position to compete for a playoff spot in 2024, but theoretically be in a better position to win a Super Bowl in the next 5 years. That could be, a distinction without a difference to some people, but it's a significant distinction if you ask me. And I think that's what it's going to ultimately come down to. But this is the beginning of the offseason, and we have a lot of work to do. They have a lot of work to do, and we have a long way.
Yeah. Well, and every week I think about what they could possibly do with that number 9 pick, and it's fascinating because there's going to be opportunity to potentially move around or grab someone there. And then, David, if they are able to find multiple suitors and they're able to get the price that they want for Justin Fields, you might potentially have yourself 3 first-rounders that you're introducing at rookie minicamp in the first week of May. And you're going to suddenly think about this class of 3 first-round picks where you go, okay, like this now has the chance to be the springboard toward greater things, toward sustainable success. And so, again, like for justifiable reasons, we're going to spend a ton of time on the number 1 pick and Caleb Williams and what that means. But man, you talk about the opportunity to use those 2 other assets. And oh, by the way, free agency now is just a month away also. And so like the Bears are going to have to start preparing for that very soon too. I can't imagine that Ryan Pace is getting much time at home these days. I'm sorry, Ryan Poles, just given the volume of homework he's got to do on all these levels to figure out what the best course of action is for this team.
It's going to be fun to cover. It's always fun to speculate, and we'll be right here for you at the Take the North podcast. Little programming note for people in the Chicago area. Brandon Pope, friend of the show, former Ball State graduate, fellow alum. He interviewed Ryan Poles last week on the U, and he's got Kevin Warren coming up on Thursday an interview at 7:00 Chicago time on WCIU. And I think it just would be, with everything going on with the Bears, big picture with the stadium, and might be worth your time. Brandon does a great job. And so Brandon Pope's interview on WCIU is 7:00 Thursday night for people in the Chicago viewing area. Also,
I did not realize he was a Ball Stater like you. That's good to know. And also, really, anytime those two guys give you some of that one-on-one access, you usually learn something. Kevin and Ryan are good at sharing.
I agree. I mean, there are times where you know, different agendas, right? Different audiences. So, they're going to sit down and probably not be asked about their draft philosophy with, what are you looking for in the left tackle, and how do you build a team with an edge rush, all those things.
You're going to learn big picture vision stuff, I think, though.
Yeah. And how they handle questions if they make, what they're comfortable talking about and how far they're willing to go. So that's also very interesting. Yeah. Brandon Pope's a Ball State grad, chirp, chirp. We're willing to take questions from our audience too. So you listeners can send questions. You can email us, takethenorthpod@gmail.com. You can Twitter, send us a Twitter direct message at takethenorthpod or at TRISLER studs, STUDZ. That is Adam Studzinski. You can get in touch with us. A lot of different ways. You can figure it out on the social media scene. We want to hear your questions. We can get to a mailbag, because those sometimes are the best way to get to what you want to talk about, whether it's on the Take the North Pod or the YouTube page. We will get to everything. Anything else, Dan?
No, I mean, it's incredible that we've made it through the finish line of another Super Bowl. And again, it'll be fun one of these years to be a participant rather than a spectator. Might be a long way off. It might not be. So we'll see which direction it goes. But it's certainly, from the day we reported to training camp to today, it's been a fun journey, and there's a lot more ahead of us, obviously.
Thank you for listening to the Take the North podcast on your free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you for watching on the 670 Scores YouTube page. It's been a lot of fun, and we have more to do, and we will be back later this week with another episode. For Adam Studzinski, our producer, and for Dan Wiederer, I'm David Haugh. We'll talk to you next time.
Great talk. See you out there.